flavor is so complicated that it's not obvious that we're going to be able to sort of crack it by just looking at that as an input. What they will be able to do is to understand a little bit more about the consequences of what you eat personally. We already can wear glucose monitors and figure out that for me, like if I drink a cup of coffee, it really causes me to spike. But a dark chocolate bar is just great. Everybody is slightly different. And you can teach people a lot about how food interacts with them. And that will get people to savor.
Spencer, welcome to Possible. You studied history at Oxford, so maybe it should come as no surprise that the Cocoa Runners website has a tab dedicated to the history and culture of chocolate. It includes in-depth articles like chocolate in the Aztec Empire and how did chocolate spread around the world. Can you tell us about how your passion for history influenced the idea for Cocoa Runners and why you share these articles with customers?
History's changed a bit since when I was sort of studying, when it was all about sort of kings and queens and sort of events and revolutions. And it's now much more about people and what's going on and looking at connections and stuff like that and what you can enjoy and what you can really sort of get out of it. And if you want to understand at the same time sort of really what's happened in the last 500 years of world history, chocolate is a phenomenal starting point because it's part of the Columbine Exchange, which is, the great changes which kicked off with Columbus, but it's also a different way of looking at things and looking at the connections and explaining what is happening. And I think the other thing about chocolate, which is sort of quite fun, is that history is all about curation. The bits you choose to remember are really what historians tell you that you should be remembering. And one of the fun things about chocolate is trying to figure out which ones are you going to enjoy. We worked with you to curate the Reid Hoffman selection of different chocolates, which would take you on all sorts of different journeys and teach you all sorts of different things. And I think that's part of the sort of magic and the fun of it. And it's also something which everybody does. We can all appreciate and we can all savor and enjoy it. And it's a great way of sort of learning about a sense that we don't often think that much about.
I was lucky enough to taste the Reid Hoffman chocolates and do taste tests actually with my kids. And I'm sort of surprised that I'm not a chocolate entrepreneur because I am obsessed with chocolate. But you were a tech entrepreneur. You worked at global juggernauts, Amazon, Hasbro. What made you take the leap into the world of chocolate?
Part of it is that I helped launch Amazon over here in the UK many, many, many moons ago, and also did stuff like music. And one of the great things about chocolate is not only do we spend more on chocolate in the UK and the US than we do on books, but unlike books, it's actually quite difficult to figure out which ones you would like. So the secret of most things in e-commerce has always been search. The equivalent of physical retail has been location, location, location. And it's candidly quite tough to beat Amazon at that game. But there are certain categories where actually you need a different form of discovery. And, so music, for example, in many ways probably had the best form of discovery anybody's ever come up with. In my generation, it was called DJs. And, you sort of have the top 40 and stuff like that. And now you've got playlists, which, and in a way, chocolate lends itself brilliantly to playlists, to helping people discover what they would like. But it also, I think, the other thing that as I got into chocolate, the more and more I discovered is this amazing world of flavor, which is a unique human attribute where it's something really strange. We do something 3 or 4 times a day. We eat and we drink. And we have this amazing skill that, unlike, for example, reading a book or learning to ride a bike when you can cycle, we don't really, at least in the US and the UK, spend that much time thinking about how to articulate flavor. But once you've got that language, it becomes just so much more fun. And it just, gives you a whole new set of experiences. So it's a bit like sort of, before you go on holiday, if you've got a guidebook and learn a few words of the language, you're going to get so much more out of it. And chocolate is a great way of sort of, giving you something on flavor.
One of the things that I love about Cocoa Runners is they, fun and educational tastings you offer. So what is the difference between taste and flavor? And expand our vocabulary a little bit and give us some sense of the language of flavor.
Yeah, well, I think the first thing I'm going to do is sort of, basically blame all of your predecessors, Reid, who were the philosophers, for basically confusing us about taste and flavor, because, the likes of Aristotle and Kant and everybody else have really confused it all there, because most people sort of, think about taste and flavor as being, as you sort of said, synonymous almost, but they're actually very, very different. So taste is something which almost all animals can do. You basically sense with various detectors in your mouth, to be very simple, and also a couple of other places, things like sweetness, sourness, saltiness, bitterness, umami, and fat. So they're things that we all readily recognize and you get really, really fast. But flavor is A, quite unique to humans, and B, it's something which we confuse a bit because even though we detect it in our mouths, it's actually our sense of smell. So the weird thing about humans is that we smell not just with our noses, but also when we put food or drink in our mouth. And it's that which creates all those other sensations. You know, as you're having your cup of tea and I'm having my cup of tea, or as we try a piece of chocolate, what we're getting out of it are actually the volatiles, which are sort of going through our, sense of smell, for want of a better word. And other animals can't do this, which is the reason why we should savor, and they can just gobble down and scarf and scoff all their food.
I mean, it reminds me so much. My brother was a sommelier for 20 years. And it's, you have a glass of wine with dinner and he's always like, no, take the bite of steak and then swish it around and then eat it and then tell me what you're feeling. And then that's different, the mouthfeel. And before you know the vocabulary, you're like, okay, you're a crazy person. But then once you learn it, it just enhances all of these, human experiences, which is so lovely. And so we were, one of the things we talk about with AI is enhancing human experience. And people are usually talking about sight and hear and what we're feeling, and they often overlook smell and taste. And you said that you actually think that like taste is going to be one of the last senses that's impacted by AI. So tell us about that, why you think that, and is there some way that AI is going to impact this?
So I think that's a great question. I love your point about the sommelier too, because I think it is that. I mean, everyone is very frightened about wine, but a good sommelier, is going to be able to explain it to you, make you feel much more comfortable and more confident, and just you will enjoy it so much more. But I think one of the strange things about flavor in particular, and taste to an extent, is we don't have a great vocabulary for it. We don't have a great sort of set of descriptions. It's not like, for example, color, which has got the Pantone system. It's not like sort of music, which, as we launched things like Last.fm and Spotify, the digitization of music meant that you could break it down into the pitch, the rhythm, the frequency, and you could sort of build digital fingerprints and you could get it understood. And similarly with music and with art, you can also, we can understand how colors work, and we can understand how you can sort of put images together. And, now that we know how cats fall apart, we're much better at actually doing image recognition. So we've got these amazing databases. And with a few exceptions, there aren't really databases of flavor in the world, which we've got. It's a unique human sense. It's not something we've been working on for that long. The Linda Buck and Richard Axel, who won the Nobel Prize for how the olfactory system works, only won it in 2004. There isn't sort of, if you like, an IMDb or an ISMN of flavor. And so, back on you as the experts on AI, I think the question is, where's the data set? How are you going to train it? And what can you do about it?
Well, all right. We tried to see what if AI could help us, because as you said, like, what is the data set? Where are we going to come up with the words and the data to be able to sort of match flavors? So we asked Inflection's Pi to come up with a few ways to describe flavor through some ultra-specific filters. So first we asked for a Renaissance-era approach to define flavor, to which Pi said, a sumptuous medley, or a veritable feast for the senses. And then we asked for a more British way, and you can get on Pi for this. Pi said, tastes like a proper cuppa, and positively scrumptious. When we asked for a botanical lens, Pi said, a blossoming sensation and a verdant burst. And then lastly, we asked Pi how to describe the flavor of chocolate. And a few answers were a creamy and luscious mouthfeel, a rich and velvety aroma, and then notes of earthiness and fruitiness. So how did Pi do? Are these horrifying, or are these words that you ever use to describe chocolate?
No, I think they're great words. And I think that Pi has picked up on one of the great secrets of chocolate, which is that that mouthfeel, which it's talking about, is due to this unique attribute of chocolate, which is the wonderful cocoa butter. So the way that flavor gets released in your mouth is basically through heat releasing volatiles. And the amazing thing about chocolate is it's literally the only thing which, when it's properly tempered, is solid at room temperature and then melts when you put it in your mouth. And it's that lovely, what Pi was sort of describing as the creamy feel, which gives rise to also what Pi was talking about, which is sometimes the verdant notes, or sometimes the earthy notes, or sometimes the fruity notes. And then the fun part actually gets to be to sort of, dive down to the next level. Okay, well, which fruit do you mean? Because the fun thing is that it's all about association. There are very, very, very few words which just describe an aroma. They're almost all based on stuff that we think about, we've tasted. So, they're like a fruit, or they're like a vegetable, or they're like, a nut or something like that. There are very, very, very few words which are just about aromas and flavor. And so it's bringing those out and just getting comfortable with them, because we hardly ever use them. I mean, we automatically as kids get shown how colors work. We get shown how to read. But unless, you're Italian or French and you're trying to basically compliment the chef, you will learn, or the cook, you will basically learn the words to appreciate what you're doing. And it sort of becomes a wonderful virtuous circle.
Another thing that's important about Cocoa Runners is, kind of selling a variety of craft chocolate from independent farms, and a massive appreciation for commitment to ensuring that all the chocolate is sustainably sourced, ethically made. So how do you lead a sustainable business that combines, capitalism and social good?
So I think that's, you've sort of, as ever, hit the $64 billion sort of question there. And I think part of it is around getting people to sit back and think a little bit more, because as you're sort of hinting at, it is very difficult to figure out how to scale a business, which is trying to pay farmers fairly and trying to get people to, be conscious and trying to eat more healthily when they're basically having their taste buds basically abused and played against them. And I think the way to try and do it is to get people to learn that this stuff is not just healthier for them, but it's also going to give them a set of different experiences. I mean, it's a little bit sort of similar to the way that, luxury goods companies can somehow get you to pay a little bit more for something which has been made with more care and made with more respect, and will be, paying the workers, they can afford to pay the workers more. Because that's the trick. The trick in chocolate is basically, how do we pay the farmers a little bit more? We're all used to paying very little, but if you pay the farmers very little money, unfortunately, you get massive environmental destruction. So, people don't necessarily realize that actually, everyone's worried about almonds and how much water they absorb, but chocolate bars are way worse. So, a handful of almonds is 500, 700 liters of water. One chocolate bar is 1,500 to 2,000 liters of water. So it's a lot. Now, that's fine if you're basically encouraging the farmers to replant the rainforest, but if they're basically desperate for money and the only way they can get more money is by cutting down the rainforest to plant more chocolate, then you've got a real problem on your hands. So I think in some ways, chocolate is harder than coffee because it's less social. It's more of a solitary pursuit. So I think it is trickier. And candidly, it's also, in some ways, it's not as obvious an upgrade.
But one of the things you're actually trying to do is make chocolate more social.
So I think you have to change the occasion. You have to make it something which you want to share. So what you do is absolutely brilliant. The Reid Hoffman chocolate collection is just fantastic at, showing people how to share it, because you want to have it together. I mean, food should be for sharing. I mean, food is the basis of civilization. We became civilized by learning to cooperate and cook together, and then by basically sharing food with one another. And it's the basis to all of that. And so, if we can go back to that and not just sort of, having it as a guilty secret on your own at work, or, on the sort of sofa on your own there. But I think the secret is to turn it into a social and sharing activity.
Yeah, maybe in addition to the word companion, which is, breaking bread together, we mean like co-chocolating.
Yeah, something like that. Some way to sort of do it.
One particular thing that was kind of stunning is, why does it take so much water to make a chocolate bar? And that's not actually, obviously, the consumption of water, because that presumably recycles, but what makes it so water intensive?
So the reason why chocolate is so water intensive is that it only grows in the rainforest, and it needs a huge amount of water to basically, one pod, which is the equivalent of one chocolate bar, more or less, or one good quality chocolate bar, requires a huge amount of water to basically turn this tiny little flour into this thing the size of an American football or a British rugby football. And it is a huge amount. And it's used to all the humidity of the rainforest. You can't grow cocoa outside of a very, very narrow band around the equator. Now, the good news is you do recycle it, as you sort of say, unless you've destroyed the rainforest and the canopy. And when that's happened, which is what's happened in West Africa, because it used to be that West Africa, Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana was largely virgin rainforest. But because the farmers there get paid less than 80 cents a day and they need $2 or $3 to live on, their only way to get more money is literally to destroy the rainforest. And when you destroy it, then you have massive problems, not just more global warming and changing the weather patterns, but you change basically where the water comes from. Because if it doesn't, rain, normally in a rainforest, it'll rain, 10, 11 months of the year. If you destroy the rainforest, you get much more concentrated rain down to 6 to 8 weeks. So you get floods and you get droughts. And you basically are pulling the water often out of the aquifers. So that's the reason why it's such a disaster environmentally. I mean, it's similar to the way that California sucks the water to grow pomegranates and to grow almonds. You could grow them in a proper way, but the problem is that you're sucking water out of the aquifers rather than recycling it. That's where the problem really comes from. It is interesting, though, that everybody assumes that, almonds and now avocados are terrible. But actually, chocolate is way, way, way worse. I mean, it's much more of a problem in terms of you're going to pick one food to basically improve your global environmental footprint outside of, giving up beef. It is definitely upgrading to craft chocolate.
Actually quite cognizant about how wine changed from generic calorie consumption to kind of the language of experience and flavor and participation and sharing. What is the kind of the history of these things, and what's the hope for how chocolate becomes the next of these culinary waves? And what are the things that that you do to try to help that? And what's the hope for the kind of human experience?
I think there's two different sort of tracks to the answer here. So I think there's one track, which is that part of the last 100 years in food has been basically an amazing series of technologies which have basically made it possible for most humans to be able to have enough calories. And this is everything from the Green Revolution and Norman Borlaug through to, sort of recent innovations like sort of vertical farming. And at the same time, the other problem has been that we've basically not respected not just the planet, but also how humans can best savor food. So what I mean by that is that we've almost commoditized food. We've almost sort of turned it into another input in the sort of massive industrial complex. So what really happened was back in the 1960s and 70s, what made ultra-processed food possible was not just the commodification of everything from wheat and corn and maize and soya and everything else. It was actually that a bunch of very clever food scientists worked out how to hack our taste buds. So if you sort of think about them as being the sort of social media equivalents, they basically worked out how to use broadly two very clever technologies. One is called the bliss point, which was invented or innovated by a guy called Howard Moskowitz doing some work for the US Army. And he basically worked out that to get soldiers to eat more, all you need to do is to add lots of sugar, salt, fat, and a bit of umami. And it's basically, you guys call it the Dorito effect. We call it the Pringle effect. Once you pot, you can't stop. Now, there are some other tricks which you can also play. There's another very famous one, which is British in this case, Eric Barbara Roll, which is basically sensory-specific satiety, which is the polite way of basically saying, if you give people lots of different senses in their mouth, they don't get bored, so they eat more of it. And these two, combined with the fact we could get more calories on people, and the fact that basically the best way for a big food company to make lots of money is to brand it, pushes people down the sort of route of playing with taste as opposed to flavor. And what's happened in most other industries is that if you want a premium product, which really appeals to people's creativity and sort of appreciation, you actually want to get them to be able to understand and appreciate flavor. And the ways to do that are to turn it into a social experience, to find a place that it works really, really well. It's sort of, it's the skating to the puck. And cheese has sort of done something similar. I mean, in the UK, we used to eat cheese out of, tubes and cans, and it was something you had as a high tea. And then people realized that actually it made a lovely ending to the meal. And we sort of, have this great idea about having cheese boards at the end of a meal. And in America, you do it slightly different. You have it at the beginning of a meal as a sort of way to get your appetite whetted, but you've got an occasion for it. And so I think the secret is what's the occasion and what's the appreciation that you can go for.
I mean, it's so obvious, but also so easy to forget because you just think like food is food is food. It'll taste the same wherever you are. And it's like, nope, that's just not how it works. Like, where are you? Who are you with? How long are you doing? Like all of those things like matter so much. And, you know, it is so critical that we get to this savoring moment. And, you know, this is a podcast about what's possible about the future. We were sort of talking about what happened in the past or throughout history. Like, what is possible for our future? Is there a way that we could use technology to get us to this point of savoring more or, change our relationship with food? Like, what do you think we can do in the future with it?
There's almost some orthogonal thinking, which may help us. So rather than just thinking about building a database of flavor, I think that actually the more interesting stuff is to sort of, try and figure out why is it, for example, that you can have a chocolate bar on one day and absolutely love it and on another day not enjoy it the same way. And what is it which is happening? Why does that happen? And that sort of, loose mass data, I think you can gather in a very different way than we've ever been able to sort of gather before. I think another thing which is really interesting is the way that technology can be used to sort of enhance the growth of food, which I think is already starting to happen a bit. Some of that isn't always for the good, but I think it can be. But I think the other angle, which is going to be really interesting, is flavor is so complicated that it's not obvious that we're going to be able to sort of crack it by just looking at that as an input. But if you want people to eat better food, what they will be able to do is to understand a little bit more about the consequences of what you eat personally through all sorts of new technologies which are coming about. So we already can wear glucose monitors and figure out that for me, like if I drink a cup of coffee, it really causes me to spike. But a dark chocolate bar is just great. Similarly, bananas aren't great for me, but eggs are. And everybody is slightly different. And you can teach people a lot about how food interacts with them, and that will get people to savor. And, one of the great mantras of the food community is look at the quality of the ingredients. So I think that it's going to be orthogonal ways. I think it's going to be things like personalized nutrition will play a huge role in this. I think that there will be a lot more advances in technologies about how you grow food. Vertical farming for tomatoes is a great example. I mean, I hope there'll be more of those. And then I also think they're just asking some difficult questions, which we've always known are there. Like, why does the same bottle of wine be different in different areas? If we can sort of gather that data and start to show people what's happening, then I think we're going to learn some amazing stuff.
So let's zoom out to the kind of the scope of the food industry, since we're talking on a technological thread right now. And, there's been various technological innovations for food, starts with fire, but, we now kitchen robots and all these other things. So what do you see as the next technological developments in the food industry, whether it's sourcing and providing, whether it's creating and serving, whether it's experience? What are some of the technological trends we should anticipate, and which one should we kind of lean into, and which one should we try to steer, kind of more carefully?
So I think that it's a great question. And I think I'm going to try and answer it by saying, which ones do I think we need to really focus on for the future and the best of humanity? Because there are a couple of things which have made a lot of the food industry possible, which are not great. For example, over-reliance on antibiotics to grow lots of meat, over-reliance on fertilizers and pesticides. And I think that it should be, and we've already seen some relatively good examples of people actually using technology to use a lot less water, use a lot less fertilizer, use a lot less pesticides to grow different foods. So I think for the benefit of humanity, there is a lot of really relatively simple technology that can be applied. But to do this, the biggest challenge is that food really hasn't had the same attention of technology as lots of other industries have over the last couple of decades. Food has been really about getting it for as cheap as you possibly can, because supply chains have got much longer, which in and of themselves are a problem. This is a euphemism for we basically managed to get lower, basically by paying farmers less and less and less, more and more and more. And that's not a very good solution for the long term, from everything from immigration through to global, deforestation and global warming. So I think thinking a little bit more about how to decommoditize food and get people to think more about flavor are some of the elements that we need to get into. So I'm not really answering your question about on the front end of it, what can we do? It's more about what is it that we can basically persuade the supply chain to look at, and how do we get people more to just be aware of the fact that not only is ultra processed food really, really bad for our health, it's really, really bad for the health of the planet and for the farmers.
I mean, this isn't science and data, but it's, as we like to say, anecdata. I feel like you can't go on Twitter without someone saying like, I just went to Europe, I ate pizza every day, and I lost 25 pounds because they were walking or they were eating non-processed food or they were having these like amazing meals that were 4 hours long as opposed to just like 20 minutes they were enjoying. Like there is something about the joy of it that extends all the way through. It's like the beautiful ingredients. It's the caring about the sustainability of it. It's the, not Kraft macaroni and cheese. I'm not totally doing it in my own life, but I'm really trying. I'm really trying.
Yeah, but I think that's exactly right. And I think that's where what loosely is called personalized nutrition will play such a role. Just the order you eat your foods in makes a huge difference. There is a reason why in, Massimo Bottura's kitchen in France and in Italy, you start with a salad because it basically puts some fiber in and it basically will help you digest everything else. There is, actually other animals are pretty smart about this. If you look at the way in which cows and goats will basically eat in a field, they have a certain order because they know what's best nutritionally. And over time, we've developed the same skill, but we've lost that and we've forgotten about it in many cultures, including the UK. And, the good news is that technology, I think, will be able to help us appreciate that. So, another example is, when should you have some craft chocolate? So to me, the ideal time to have some craft chocolate is at the end of a meal. And the reason for this is that you do literally have a second stomach. It is well known that you have taste sensors, not just in your mouth, but also, for example, in your stomach and in your heart and other places. And if you see something sweet at the end of a meal, that's the reason why. At the end of a meal, you think you've had a really great meal and you feel very, very full, and then out comes the dessert trolley. And suddenly, wow, I've suddenly got room for a bit more food. Now, the trick there is not necessarily to eat everything that's on the dessert trolley. But if you have a little bit of something sweet, that will basically satisfy the senses in your stomach, your second stomach, speed up digestion, and you will feel happier. And you will basically have had a great opportunity to chat to your friends and partners and family about what sensations you got there. So, yeah, I think there's a lot that you can sort of do. The anecdotal stuff, I think, is right. And I think that that's what you need to be focusing on more on. But I think that you will be able to learn from that too. I think once you've got it's quite easy to turn some of that anecdotal stuff with the right tools into real data.
One of the things that, in sharing chocolate with you over the dinner table that has always, kind of engaged and delighted me was this notion of chocolate becoming a shared experience, a shared vocabulary, a way of building human connection. Say a little bit more about, kind of this humanist view, this social view of the future of chocolate experience.
So I think one of the things I've learned from you, Reid, and I love talking to you about, is friendship. And I think one of the great themes of friendship is about having the opportunity and the space to be able to talk. And some of that should be as unconstrained as possible. So, to me, and I think to you, you can sort of split the world into people who like dinner parties and people who like drinks parties. And I think dinner parties are great because you can have really good conversations. There's a bit like, if you're in a bus, you can have, or in an airplane, you get this great time just to sort of sit with somebody and really talk with them. And it's not like in a drinks party where there's loads of different people, lots of different conversations. And in a way, actually, one of the interesting things about flavor is that flavor is actually very similar to the way that if you walk into a room and you hear 50 different conversations, you can make no sense of it. If, however, you focus on just one of those conversations, you can actually start to have a really interesting experience. And actually, that is the way flavor works. There's this weird thing called the Lang limit, which we don't really understand quite how and why it works, but actually, even great sommeliers can only identify 2 or 3 flavor notes at any one time. So what you want to try and do is basically look at the wave and how the journey works. And that's, I think, the way that friendships and great conversations should go too. You don't want to be having loads of cacophonous, different conversations going on at the dinner party at the same time. You want to be having one theme. You don't necessarily want to control where it's going to go. You want to be able to exchange it. And the great thing about flavor is if you tell somebody what you're getting, they may also suddenly realize, yeah, I actually do get that note of hazelnut that you're describing. And if they don't get it, that's absolutely fine. It's just because their oral microbiome, the yeast and bacteria they've got in their mouth don't release that flavor note. But it gives you a chance to do it. So I think that the social lessons you can get from chocolate are quite important. And it's the same social lessons you get with food. I mean, I think one of the reasons why the Italians and the French are just so much more articulate is that if somebody's gone to the effort of cooking a meal rather than just sort of microwaving it, you want to thank them. And you do that by basically showing your appreciation by articulating what's gone into it. I mean, it's a bit like, if you want to thank somebody for a great piece of music, you will try and say what you enjoyed in it. Or if you want to describe a book and say you really enjoyed it, you will focus on what it is in there that you liked. And I think that the great thing about chocolate is, unlike, for example, coffee or wine, which are actually quite adult tastes, chocolate is something which anybody from the age of 8 to 88, in fact, 4 to 104, can really appreciate and engage with and discuss. And it's very, very democratizing.
So shall we move to rapid fire? Is there a movie, song, or book that fills you with optimism for the future?
Loads of movies, loads of music. I love listening to music, as you know. Yes, there is a book which I love recommending to anybody who's into thinking about food and the environment and everything. And it's a slightly strange book. It's called The Wizard and the Prophet by a guy called Charles C. Mann, who also wrote 1491 and 1493. But it's an amazing story about both sides of the Green Revolution. Norman Borlaug on the one hand, William Voigt on the other. And it presents both sides, the technical optimism and the sort of, the slightly Malthusian fear of technology with a very nuanced approach, which shows you that if you think in a balanced way and you are realistic and structured and you look at what's going on, so he's a great historian, it gives you a real sense of optimism that we can deal with a lot of the challenges we've been discussing and seize the opportunity.
So Spencer, what is a question that you wish people would ask you more often?
Can I cheat and have 2?
Sure.
So one is, what's the best way to end a meal? Which the obvious answer is craft chocolate. And then the second one of which is, do you ship internationally? And the answer is obviously yes.
Excellent.
I love it.
So where do you see progress or momentum outside of your industry that inspires you?
So on the grounds that we aren't really about nutrition and health, although eating chocolate is very good for you, it is very healthy. I think that personalized nutrition is one of the intriguing areas which we will see more and more on, because that will help us with health in no end of ways. So I think that, all of those amazing new initiatives, Zoe's and everything else, are anything you can measure, anything you can start tracking will start to really help. And I think that's where AI will just turn all this amazing reams of data into real insight. And I think one of them will be around health and nutrition.
Can you leave us with a final thought on what is possible over the next 15 years if everything breaks humanity's way? And what's the first step to get there?
So, the first step is obviously to learn to savor craft chocolate. But I do think that we are on the path to recognizing and appreciating the way that our own personal health, the health of the planet, the future are all intimately linked. And a large part of that is by being much more conscious about what we consume, how we savor it, and with whom we enjoy it. And I think we're starting to sort of get more insight that food is not just fuel. It's not just a sort of, scarf. It is much more something which links everybody together. And the health of the planet is super important on that.
Possible is produced by Wonder Media Network. It's hosted by Aria Finger and me, Reid Hoffman. Our showrunner is Sean Young. Possible is produced by Katie Sanders, Edie Allard, Sarah Schleid, Adrian Bain, and Paloma Moreno Jimenez. Jenny Kaplan is our executive producer and editor.
Special thanks to Surya Yalamanchili, Saida Sapieva, Ian Alice, Greg Beato, Parth Patil, and Ben Rellis. And a big thanks to Mika Hyman, Genevieve Lazar, Carrie Wang, and Little Monster Media Company.